Back in June 2022, Bond producer Barbara Broccoli said in an interview with Deadline, "We're working out where to go with him, we're talking that through. There isn't a script and we can't come up with one until we decide how we're going to approach the next film because, really, it's a reinvention of Bond. We're reinventing who he is, and that takes time. I'd say that filming is at least 2 years away." I'm making this video in August 2024, and there is still no news on a new film, script, or Bond, so I guess the "at least" part of Barbara's sentence really was doing the heavy lifting there. Good evening, Mr. Bond fans. It's been a little while since I made a video discussing next Bond film news, and, well, that's largely because there hasn't been any.
I know.
I mean, yeah, there's been the usual tabloid stuff proclaiming unnamed sources have revealed casting details and the like, but that's about it, really. On the game front, 007 Cypher seems to have quietly dried up, and IO Interactive's Project 007 still seems years away. This 007 Road to a Million, of course, the Amazon game show hosted by Brian Cox in character as a Bond villain-like figure, and that's getting a season 2, apparently. Literary Bond seems to be more focused on spin-offs these days, with Kim Sherwood's series centered on other 00 agents continuing into its 3rd installment, and apparently next year we can look forward to the start of a new book series, which sees Q laid off from MI6 and going on to solve cozy murder mysteries in provincial England. And that's all well and good with me. I welcome Bond spin-off books, and if you're a regular on this channel, then you know I love me a Bond game. But there's no getting around the fact that there is nonetheless a Bond-shaped hole in our lives, and that hole does not look like it's going to get filled anytime soon. It's been years now, and I still find myself wondering about the same things, really. I mean, what's taking so long? Will it be the same writers as last time coming back? Who could the director be? Are Barbara Broccoli and Michael Wilson going to hand over the producing reins to someone else, or will they just even sell up the company? The conversation really hasn't changed at all, and I mean, in previous years, okay, some of it made sense. You know, 2021 was all about celebrating Daniel Craig and his final Bond film. 2022 was all about celebrating the 60th anniversary of the film series, but since then, the excuses have kind of run out, and it's just been crickets, really. So what are Eon Productions doing if they're not already hard at work on the next era of Bond? Why, finding the funding for a Daniel Craig passion project, of course. Yeah, so earlier this year there were reports that Daniel Craig was wanting to make a film version of his stage production of Shakespeare's Othello, and he was on a mission to get backing for the film. Eon being behind the original stage production, it made sense that Barbara Broccoli would be a part of any film adaptation. And indeed, these reports were seemingly confirmed in August 2024. Jordan Rumi of the website World of Real wrote an article regarding the funding of the project, and indeed, on August 1st, Eon Productions registered the Othello Film Company Limited. You can see it on the British Companies House website, and this is common practice for them. You can see the similar companies that were registered for previous Bond films there. There's B25 for No Time to Die, B24 for Spectre, B23 for Skyfall. Important to note that there is currently no B26, but we'll come on to that in a bit. Interesting comment from the World of Real article, perhaps to be taken with more than just a pinch of salt, but the writer divulges a rumour that Broccoli and Craig secured funding for Othello by making a deal with the Qataris to get Broccoli to set a part of the next Bond film in Doha, Doha being the capital city of Qatar. So if the next Bond does indeed swing by the Persian Gulf for his next outing, I guess we'll know whether or not that rumour to be true. And I mean, sure, I'm okay with that as a Bond film location. Lord knows, so long as it's not Italy. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Italy, but it featured in every single Craig Bond film except for Skyfall, so I'm happy for a change of pace. More to the point though, if that rumour is true, and I would certainly take it with more than just a pinch of salt, if it is true, then it is it's the first indication of something about the next Bond film. We don't know anything about it, other than, oh hey, I guess it might be partially set in Qatar, but it's interesting to note that creative decisions about the next Bond film could be potentially made via Daniel Craig's passion project. And if Othello is really the next big thing on Eon's radar, if that does go into production next year, as the article from World of Real suggests, could this mean that Bond 26 is even further away than anticipated? Are we not going to hear of it even starting up until the very end of 2025 or even into 2026? Not that Eon can't work on multiple things at once, of course, but this level of interest from Barbara Broccoli and other projects aside from Bond is a bit of a new and unprecedented thing in the world of Bond. It's interesting interesting looking at Eon's production history over the years that, aside from Call Me Bwana in 1963, they were the Bond factory, and then since 2014 they've produced more non-Bond films than they have Bond films. And I'm certainly not here to say that they shouldn't be making other things. I mean, they've clearly got other priorities, and that's fine. Great, good for them, but I would still like a new Bond film before I turn 40. I've discussed this before on the channel, and it is, it's part of the problem with having essentially an hereditary monarchy at the top of this thing. Any kind of movement is very much dependent on them feeling motivated, them wanting to do it, and sure, I want them to feel motivated, I want them to want it as much as I do, I don't want them to feel like they're forced into making Bond films. But what can I do? I'm a fan of this series, and I want more, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And I've come to experience this sentiment as something of a weirdly contentious one. Like, every time I make one of these videos, some of the comments will inevitably be, oh, look at this entitled fan thinking that he's owed something. Why can't you just wait patiently and appreciate what they've already made? And it's like, yeah, okay, I don't wake up every morning, like, with my fists clenched, cursing Eon Productions for not getting a move on with the next era of Bond. And yeah, I do think that they've made some amazing films, most of which I love so much, which is why I'd kind of like there to be the prospect of a new one on the horizon at some point. I can only imagine that succession planning is very much at the forefront of Barbara and Michael's minds right now. Everything they've said so far indicates that it'll be business as usual by the time they eventually get around to Bond 26, but Michael G. Wilson is in his 80s, Barbara's in her 60s, and at the rate that these films are getting made these days, they surely need to be thinking about who takes over, or do they indeed just sell up and live out their days in a giant vault of Bond money. They both have kids. Michael's in particular have been involved in various Bond-related projects. David G. Wilson has worked on a bunch of the films and executive produced some Bond games, even goes so far as to lend his likeness to one of the characters in a cameo that feels poetically reminiscent of how his dad's cameos in Bond films are, and Greg Wilson has also been involved in the films for a number of years. It's a family business for sure, but it's not necessarily a guarantee that it'll stay that way, unless it truly is a constitutional necessity that all broccoli children must continue making Bond films until the end of their days. David G. Wilson appeared in a video interview for Who Knew, and it was interesting hearing him talk about the Bond film production being a family business, and he certainly cast some doubts over his own taking up the reins of producing the Bond films.
I'm the third generation, and if you're familiar with family businesses, the third generation is usually the one that destroys everything, so I did not want to play that role. We had Cubby and Dana, first generation. They built this incredible enterprise, and then my father and my aunt turned it into an empire. I mean, they grew the business tremendously and produced tons of successful films, broke box office records, all the rest of it. And now there's little old me, and my brother. We're sort of in the same generation. He's 10 years younger, but it's like, what do we do? So my brother has decided that he wants to continue to working for the films and to, he's got other projects going on with the film franchise. And I decided, I think we need some new business to kind of supplement what we're doing in transition, because I was concerned that the film business had headwinds, that, it'll come and go like radio. There was the golden age of radio, and then it kind of goes into decline for a bit, and then it comes back with podcasts, so I figured that film may follow a similar trajectory, but I'm worried that there are far more interesting and engaging ways for younger people to spend their time and money, such as with video games and whatnot. So I figured it was good for us to look for other businesses that we could learn from, that we could teach them, some of our storytelling and some of the things that we've learned along the way, and from that, create new business opportunities. So I kind of went out with that intention.
Ever since MGM was bought by Amazon, there have been questions about, would Barbara and Michael sell up to them, and what would that mean for the series? It's been a few years now, and nothing has happened. I don't doubt that there will probably be high-level executive conversations going on periodically with Eon and MGM and Amazon. I would imagine that as soon as Eon are ready to go with the next Bond, it'll be an automatic green light. But so far, I don't think that there is anything to suggest that anything terribly active has started regarding the production. As I've said before, I think that the earliest indications that something is moving will probably be from a relatively boring source, like it'll be like, oh, hey, they finally registered B 2026 Limited on Company's House or something like that. Eon have never been one to do, like, they don't hire out the big arenas at Comic-Con and make announcements in front of the fans. Whenever an official announcement does come, it'll probably be at a press conference, or more likely just a tweet that says development is underway or something like that. But yeah, it's already been 3 years since the last Bond film and nothing seems to be moving, and if Othello really is going to be Barbara's focus, I mean, that's what, another year and a half? 2 years? Assuming production happens next year, and then depending on when the film is released, I can only assume that they'll want to do some big awards push, maybe even try to get Daniel an Oscar, and when does that take us to? Christ, I really am going to be 40 before the next film comes out. I really don't mean this video to be a total downer, folks, but yeah, I wanted to make a video. I wanted to do a pulse check on the future of Bond, and right now, this pulse is in need of a Vesper to turn up hurriedly, put in the right wire, and press the damn button. I suppose, though, there is another school of thought that could argue that the big gap is not a bad thing, actually, and don't get me wrong, I think the real reason we're experiencing such a big gap is entirely because Eon Productions are wanting to dabble in things other than Bond, but maybe you could make the case that it's not a bad thing for the series. Daniel Craig was an overwhelmingly popular Bond with general audiences to the point that he is synonymous with the role for many people, and yes, that's a sweeping generalization, but hey, critical praise, box office juggernauts, cultural relevancy, whoever the next guy is going to be, obviously, be compared with Daniel Craig, first and foremost, and maybe a bit of distance wouldn't be such a bad thing. It's never healthy to jump straight from one long-term relationship to another, is it? From Dalton to Brosnan, there was a 6-year gap. From Brosnan to Craig, there was a 4 years gap, so maybe they've just decided that, hey, this is part of the formula now, but it just stings a bit because, well, because the gaps between most of the Craig-era films have been a bit longer than we're traditionally used to anyway. With the way No Time to Die ended especially, maybe it's good for general audiences to have a bit of distance from the character and not hear news about a new production for a while. Maybe it's not healthy for people to be thinking about James Bond every single day. Maybe, but we can't be certain. I'm also hoping sincerely that whenever we do get around to the next Bond, they get at least a couple of films out of the gate in relatively quick succession. No Bond has had longer than 2 years between their debut and their follow-up. Well, no Bond that has had more than one film, that is, of course, and while that production timescale seems like less of a sure thing these days, hell, I'd even take, 3 years between movies if it meant we got them with some consistency again. Admittedly, I've only really been a Bond fan through the Brosnan and Craig eras, so I have no first-hand knowledge or experience with the presumably interminable 6-year gap between License to Kill and GoldenEye, but surely what we're experiencing now must be comparable, right? Like, just the nothingness, and I think we'll be lucky at this rate if the gap is indeed only 6 years and we get Bond 26 by 2027, because, oh god, as terrifying as it is for me to admit this, that might now be the earliest best estimate at this time? In an attempt to end this stream of consciousness on something resembling a positive note, I will say that I see the opinion expressed every once in a while that there won't actually be any more Bond films. Killing the character off in No Time to Die was symbolic of ending the series entirely, and there's not going to be another Bond movie, you stupid slut. But I really do have to disagree with that. I think so long as human beings value money, and feature films are still being made as commercial products, there will be a Bond 26 at some point. We're talking about an iconic character who has survived through 60 years of ever-changing cultural cinematic landscapes, and sure, some films might have had slightly disappointing box office returns for the studios, but there has never truly been an out-and-out Bond movie flop. This character, these films, the product tie-ins, etc. make money, and there will always be more so long as they do, which will be interesting to see how that pans out once the character goes public domain in the next few years, but that's a subject for another video. I genuinely hope that this isn't really making me seem like some asshole entitled fan. I really don't want to come across as that. I'm really just talking through my own thoughts and the facts that I know about the current state of the situation. But do please let me know your own thoughts in the comments section below. We can treat this as a kind of group therapy, which is, I think, what I really need right now regarding the future of this film series. Also below, you can click the subscribe button and the Mrs. Bell notification button to stay up to date on future video uploads. And with all that being said, and until next time, Bond fans, so long for now.